Welcome to Behind the Line, where we pull back the curtain on the challenges facing first responders and frontline workers. The work you do is unique, and so are the stresses that go with it. Join me as we tackle key issues to reduce risks for burnout, and as we work to support you in doing the job you love without sacrificing being the kind of person you want to be. Hey there, and welcome back to Behind the Line. I'm your host, Lindsay Foss. If you're new to Behind the Line, what you should know about me is that I'm a clinical counselor specializing in trauma therapy. And after over a decade working with first responders and frontline workers around issues like burnout, compassion fatigue, PTSD, and related OSIs, I've become a passionate wellness advocate and educator for those who sacrifice so much for our communities out on the front lines. Behind the Line is a place for us to talk about the real life behind the scenes challenges facing you on the front lines. I created this podcast with the hope of bringing easy access to skills for wellness, allowing you to find greater sustainability both on the job and off. Welcome back, everyone. We are in our summer series where we're just hearing stories from various amazing first responders and frontline workers. I'm so grateful to join you again with an amazing guest, and I can hardly wait for you guys to hear it. Let's dive in. Welcome, Jeff. I'm so excited to have you here on Behind the Line today. I am so excited that we are finally connecting. I feel like we've tried in a few different ways to get connected and have this moment together. And I'm really excited to get your story because I actually came across pieces of your story in an article I came across on my Facebook feed one day. And as soon as I saw it, I tagged it and said, we have to connect with Jeff at some point in time. So I'm really glad that we get to finally do this.
Well, thank you for having me, Lindsay. This is honestly, it's an honor to be here. And as I was, before the show, we were talking about this. I think what you're doing is incredible. These difficult conversations need to happen, and yeah, I think it's really great that you're putting these conversations out there. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thanks so much, Jeff. All right, we're going to start by talking about your story. So what brought you into first response frontline work? You work as a paramedic. So what brought you into that kind of work?
Yeah, I probably didn't take the path that most people took. I wasn't a lifeguard. I didn't volunteer at St. John's Ambulance, but I did come from a family of first responders. My mom was a nurse. She was a nurse in the palliative care ward. And I can remember hearing stories growing up of her being with people in those final moments of their life and providing comfort and, an ear, support and that sort of thing. So I think I was very much attracted to the idea of helping other people out at a young age for my mom. My wife's a police officer in the K-9 unit with the transit police. My brother-in-law is a firefighter. So it seemed like the right thing to do. Yeah. So it was bizarre. I was working at early in my 20s, working at a golf course of all things. And they needed someone to take a first aid course to be a first aid attendant. And, once I took that first aid course, I was hooked and I wanted to do more with it. And I live in North Vancouver. So I was walking by the hospital one day at Lionsgate Hospital, and I saw these two guys cleaning a stretcher outside in the ambulance bay outside of the hospital. And I walked up to them and I said, and actually it's funny, one of the guys ended up becoming the mayor of North Vancouver, Daryl Masato, who's was an amazing mentor throughout my career. But walked up to him and I said, hey, like how would one go about becoming a paramedic? And he said, and these were back in the day when the rules about riding third or being an observer were a little bit more relaxed in the BC ambulance service. And he said, why don't you come out with me tonight? And so I went out with them and we did some calls, and it was awesome. I was hooked, and that was sort of the beginning of my career. So cool. That was early in 2000. Yeah. So I loved it, and I was hooked.
So what was the hook? Like, what about it was the thing that grabbed you and made you think, yeah, this is what I want to do?
Well, I think in my early 20s, and I kind of relate this to being very impressionable at that age, like kind of like my teenagers are right now. But I was very much the idea of the adrenaline rush of going towards chaos. You could see an ambulance going down the street with the lights and sirens on, going through intersections. And these people are heading towards danger and heading towards something that sounds terrible. And just so that idea of being that person that calm in the storm was something that really interested me. As I'd find out later on in my career as a paramedic, we know that, just because you see an ambulance heading down the street, lights and sirens on, doesn't mean it's an emergency. As a matter of fact, the high acuity calls make up probably less than 10% of the work we do. But just that, that perception of heading towards danger and being able to help somebody out in their worst moment was something that really interested me.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, I think that is kind of the appeal on the front end. We did another conversation with another medic who's in Texas, and he said he said it differently. He was very much I watched a lot of TV, and on TV it looked like it was all these really cool moments where there's like a pole sticking out of someone and you got to figure out what to do about that, and like all the trauma stuff. And then when we were talking about some of the things that maybe surprised him about the job, one of the first ones he mentioned was there's not actually a lot of those, despite the the proportion that it's demonstrated on TV as being by and large what you do in a day. Actually, it's just a lot of heart attacks and shortness of breath calls and things that medically are really interesting, but are not what I thought I was signing up for.
Absolutely. And I was an instructor for 10 years, which I loved. I loved, mentoring new students. But that's one of the first things that I would say to these students that were really nervous and anxious about coming out is that, listen, it's not what you think it is. It's not, just because we have our lights and sirens on does not mean it's the end of the world. The majority of what we do, and I worked in Vancouver, and a lot of what we do, as we know, with some of the areas in talking about the downtown east side, there's a tremendous amount of mental health calls and social work. And I think as a primary care paramedic, my role, the best medicine I could do for people was to advocate for them. So being able to talk to someone and being able to be silent with someone in some of their worst moments, just being there for somebody was some of the best work that I've ever done. It wasn't the bag valve mask or the defibrillator or starting an IV. It was being able to have a conversation with someone in the worst moments of their life. So that, I think, is truly what ended up being what I discovered and surprised me about being a paramedic was, hey, it's not about all the equipment and the bells and whistles. It's about, being able to talk to someone, being able to comfort someone in the worst moments. And that goes back to what I learned from my mom and the amazing care that she gave people on the palliative care unit. So,
yeah. I mean, that's a very beautiful piece to be able to translate, in that legacy of, I learned this here and I get to see how it translates into this space where it's really, really necessary.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I think that, and for everyone who's thinking about getting into this career too, is that was difficult. It was really difficult in my early 20s to be able to have some very difficult conversations with people. Walking into, in my early 20s, walking into a house where a couple has been married for 50 years and they've just lost one of their loved ones, and I'm there to comfort them in that moment. What experience do I have to be able to say anything that's going to make them feel better in that moment? So getting to overcome, some of my fears and being able to offer some support was really challenging, but I became very good at it over the years, and something that I have a lot of pride in when I look back on my career.
That's awesome. I feel like you're hitting all the things before I've even asked for them, which is really cool. I'm going to back up just a tiny bit. When you first imagined going into the work, what did you imagine or anticipate or expect would be the things that would bring satisfaction versus the things that you thought would be the challenges at that time? And then the follow-up question I'll just front load is, what do you think surprised you in terms of what actually ended up bringing satisfaction and what actually ended up being the challenges as you moved through the job? So kind of the front end anticipation, but then the actual lived experience.
Yeah, that's a good question. I, didn't know what to expect as it was learning on the fly when I started. I honestly thought that I would be making a difference in people's lives. And I think a lot of what you touched on, what we get from TV, is that a lot of those, what we see is the life-saving moments that first responders have, and that I was going to be making a huge difference and be thanked and rewarded for what I did. And I found very early on that it is a very thankless job, and there isn't a lot of those moments that you make a difference, that you save someone's life. There is definitely. I look back on my career, and I've been part of some incredible experiences where I have made a difference in people's lives, but they are few and far between. And I don't think that I don't think I expected to ever be thanked for what I did, but it's interesting as a paramedic. If I can just sort of, I'm going to jump around here with my thoughts a little bit, but
yeah, go for it.
It's challenging because we take people to the hospital. We provide a little bit of care. You may be with someone for a half an hour, and then you drop them off at the hospital, and you're so busy, you got to go on and do the next call. So you never really find out what happens to that person.
Yeah.
You don't find the backstory to what happens, and that is challenging because I, as a paramedic, was always trying to improve and try to think about, the call. What could I have done differently? What could I have done better? And if you don't find out what happens at the end of it, it's challenging to put all those pieces of the puzzle together. So that was something that surprised me throughout my career. But the things that did, to the second part of your question, the things that actually I found a lot of satisfaction in, as I mentioned before, were the conversations that I had with people. I had some incredible conversations over 20 years with people that, whether they were people that surprised me that I was going, I did get a little bit jaded, and to say the least, throughout my career. But going into some patient's house that I had sort of preconceived ideas about, and then find out the backstory about how they got to, whether it was drug addiction or just a bad situation they're in, and finding out how they got there. I loved those moments. I really treasure those conversations that I had with people. And I made some incredible friendships throughout my career, whether they were with colleagues or other first responders or hospital staff. I look back on that, and those were the moments that I love. And I still, as I've stepped away from the job, I miss. And you sort of forget. It's like an old boyfriend or girlfriend. You forget all the bad moments, but you remember the good ones. So,
totally. That fantasy version of what
that's
was.
right.
Yeah. Totally.
So that brought me a tremendous amount of satisfaction. I was lucky enough to be part of I delivered 8 babies, and just to be part of that situation, bringing life into this world, incredible. And I love those experiences. So yeah, it's not those, as I mentioned, it's not those life-saving moments that I look back on that brought me happiness and satisfaction. It's those little conversations that I had that were great and amazing.
It's amazing how it's the small things that kind of take us by surprise,
Totally.
right? Like, I think we often enter any kind of helping profession with some imaginings of how we're going to change the world and make it a better place. And, these like big dream ideas of what that's going to look like. And some of us might do some aspects of that and have an impact in ways that are really significant. But even for those who have that story, I don't think that's the story that they feel most excited about. I think it is those small moments that we kind of bank to, because they're the ones that feel differently personal and connective. Right.
Absolutely. I think you hit it there by saying connection. And I think as human beings, that's something that we strive for, is connections with people. And so I'm so grateful to have had so many connections over my 20-year career. And I mean that. I've been invited, I never took that for granted, being invited into somebody's house and being someone trusting me. I'm a complete stranger, and trusting me with their life or their loved ones, for that matter. I took a lot of pride in that. And
Fair.
Yeah.
I feel like on the flip side of it, the challenges that I hear most often in terms of what makes the work really hard or really difficult to sustain in is so much the stuff that leaves us feeling really disconnected, right? Like whether that's, a lack of support, really frustrating kinds of workplace environments outside of the calls. Like I can know that the calls are going to be hard and challenging, but I'm also trained for that. But I'm not really trained for being in these environments where there's all this like bureaucratic kind of bullshit and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like it's often those layers of disconnection that end up, I think, taking a different kind of toll on us in terms of trying to figure out how we do the work long term.
Yeah, and it's a great point because, and I hope you don't mind, I want to touch base on that a little bit because,
Yeah.
you know, when I came into my career in 2000, the year 2000, um, I was well trained. I took a paramedic course for a year, and I was well trained in protocols and you know, equipment and how to deal with this situation. If you know, we had a congestive heart failure patient, how to deal with that, or how to deal with anaphylaxis, or how to deal with that. But what I wasn't trained for was the other stuff that came with the call. You know, that how I was going to react to it. And I think it's important that people know about first responders is that we're asking them to put their emotions aside to do a job. I mean, it wouldn't make sense to run into some of these calls and have disgust or fear or sadness in that moment. You need to put those emotions aside to be able to get that call done. And I think that's where I got into trouble early on in my career, is that I wasn't trained for how to deal with those situations. Some of the things that I saw and witnessed, I had no training in how to deal with myself after the call and how to look after myself. And that got me into trouble early on in my career. We talked a little bit about teenagers before, and I kind of go back to being when I started my career in my early 20s. I was very impressionable and looked up to people that I believed were courageous and brave. And the way I defined that were first responders and paramedics that were stoic, that, you know what, it didn't bother. They would go into the more
Didn't phase them.
stuff, and then they would just go on and about their day. You know, I could see them having lunch after the call,
Yeah.
and just go about their day like nothing happened. And that was my definition of a
Right.
strong and someone that was good at their job. So I
Yeah.
took on that as what I thought was a skill set of a good paramedic, and very much buried a lot of those emotions and some of those difficult calls that I did. Um, Another one of the things that people did is got together after work and drank, and that's when they
Yeah.
talked about some of these calls. So I figured that these cultural norms that existed was the way the business was done. So I very much got caught up in that, and early on, and used alcohol as a crutch. Early on in my career, to get through some of those difficult moments and to diffuse, because there wasn't really, when I started, there wasn't critical incident stress debriefing. Believe it or not, we're only talking about 22 years ago, and that was not a normal part of the job.
Yeah.
I, you know, I didn't see that until maybe 10 or 15 years into my career. So, so that's when we did our critical incident stress debriefing, was at the bar after we
Yeah.
drank.
Totally.
And so, you know, in 2000, I used that as, you talk about developing coping mechanisms. One of my coping mechanisms was alcohol, and you know, whether it's good or bad was a part of the way I debriefed after a difficult day. And it wasn't problematic early on. And I hope you don't mind. I'm going to just sort of jump
No,
into
go for it.
some of the
Yeah.
challenges that I faced, but
Yeah.
early on, it wasn't really problematic. It was something that I did after work, and you know, it wasn't a daily thing. But in 2007, this may be triggering for some people, but I think it's important to share some of these stories. I responded to um, uh, uh, one of the worst gangland shootings in Vancouver. It was at the Fortune Happiness restaurant, which is, I think, the ironic to hear the title of the restaurant. But after that call, I had this, you know, you talk about moral injuries, and that's where that, you know, to think that another human being could do this to others. You know, 7 people were shot at this restaurant, and I really struggled with that. That's where I think that the really where PTSD started for me. Although I wasn't diagnosed, I I went after that call. I remember driving home and reliving that scene in the restaurant. And that's when I began to really use alcohol as a coping mechanism. And it became part of my my day-to-day life. You know, on my days off, I found that I was now, you know, consumed with reliving that scene in the restaurant, you know, and some of the uncomfortable symptoms that PTSD, you know, like that hypervigilance and not being able to sleep and that sort of thing. And I was using alcohol to get through those difficult times, and it became, you know, but as I, you know, I stuffed those emotions down because I thought that, you know, that my peers that were the stoic paramedics, that the strong ones, that's what they did. So I continued on, and in 2009, things really took a turn for me. I was working in the downtown east side, and I delivered twin baby girls, and just an incredible call. And the very next call was for a 2-year-old child that was a pedestrian struck and killed, and that stopped me in my, you know, in my tracks. And, you know, I was heading home that day to my 2-year-old son at home, and that's where things got really bad for me. I began to use alcohol every day. I was off work at this point, and I was waking up drinking and drinking till a point where I would pass out at night, using you know, Ativan and Zopiclone to sleep at night, because the nightmares were so bad. So my marriage was falling apart, and my wife decided, you know, said, listen, why don't we get some marriage counseling? And that's where he, you know, after speaking with the marriage counselor, she said, listen, I think you've got, you know, post-traumatic stress. I think you need to speak to a psychologist that has some experience with trauma. And that's where I got that first diagnosis of PTSD. So I was able to, and I did get some help early on, and I've been sober since then, which I quit drinking. And you know, despite that, it's amazing, despite the challenges I've had in my life since then, alcohol has not been one of them. It's something that I've been able to put away, but I did get some help. And, you know, I spent 3 months working on doing some exposure therapy and CBT, and I got a lot better, and I went back to work, and post-traumatic stress was something at that point that was behind me, and you know, something that happened and I didn't need to think about again, you know, which is I know now is I
was gonna say, how long did that go for?
Yeah, exactly. You know, I went about my career. I had, you know, now I had these great these healthy coping mechanisms. I took up woodworking, of all things. That's how I spent my days off. Yeah, I started building furniture and exercise, and kind of became a fanatic about exercise, and felt like things were going along just fine for me. And post-traumatic stress, and I felt sort of invincible and bulletproof at that point. I'd gone through this. This isn't something that's going to happen to me again. I don't drink anymore, blah, blah, blah. I'm fine now. So, and, you know, spent the next 10 years going about my career, and in 2019 is when I was underneath a truck. I was doing a call underneath there was a truck where a child had been struck by a vehicle again. And that's when things everything kind of flooded back to me. I was now, you know, struggling after that call. I was, you know, a lot of the same symptoms that I experienced in 2009 were back again, but I was really good at just this sort of that denial of like, you know, this isn't something I'm going through, you know, this is, and just kind of pushed away until the point where I got so depressed and anxious about not sleeping anymore. I'd be up for, you know, a couple days without sleeping. I was depressed. I was anxious about going to work and that sort of thing. So it's amazing. You feel like, you know, this is something that's happened to me. I've already gone through this. Isn't going to happen to me again. And here I was, you know, 10 years later, back into the same spot that I was in 2009. So I struggled, and this is where things in my life took, and sort of explains where my path has changed a little bit, and how I've come to be to what I'm doing now. But I in 2019, I ended up making a difficult decision to step away from work for a while and try to work on myself. So I did some things like I did EMDR therapy.
Yeah.
I was put into a trauma treatment program for first responders, which was I'd never heard of before, but it was a sort of a multidisciplinary treatment program for first responders that had gone through post-traumatic stress. And I did a lot of work, and I can't tell you how hopeless I felt after that, to still be struggling with these nightmares and flashbacks and it got to the point in last year in 2021 where it was February 16th. I woke up and I had had enough. Was now back into the same position that I was in 2009. I'd done what I felt was a lot of work on myself, and was still struggling with these flashbacks and nightmares. I remember that day just thinking that this is enough. I can't take this anymore. I drove my son to the gym, and then I headed towards the Lionsgate Bridge, and I parked my car at the shopping center, Park Royal, and walked onto the bridge deck. And at that point, I was there to end the suffering. I'd had enough. I was exhausted. I stepped over the railing, and I remember, Lindsay, feeling in that moment, for the first time, like in so long, I felt in control. I felt at peace with the decision I was going to make. Yeah. Like I felt I'm no longer going to be suffering, or I'm no longer going to be haunted by these nightmares anymore. And the irony,
take some power back.
Yeah, and I felt good. I felt about the decision I was going to make, the irony is I'd been on that bridge deck with so many people in those moments, and trying to empathize and sympathize with them, or trying to connect with them, but I had no idea what they were going through. And there I was now in that same situation, and I could hear the sirens in the distance coming up, the Lionsgate Bridge, and eventually there was a police officer next to me over the railing, and I was apprehended. It's important that I felt like I was arrested at first because they put you in the handcuffs, but I was apprehended under the Mental Health Act and taken to St. Paul's to get the help I needed. But yeah, it's such an interesting perspective. You talk about whether people have regrets or about what they've gone through. What's happened, how the 90-degree or 180-degree turn that my life has taken since then has been pretty incredible. And I'm grateful to have gone through that experience. I don't know if that sounds right, but there's not a lot of people that can be in those moments. That was the lowest point in my life. Yeah. But I have that as an experience now. And I think what it's led me now to this journey of trying to help others out is been pretty incredible. So it's an experience that I'm grateful to have gone through and survived, and grateful for the help that I've got, and I'm still here now, and think what I'm doing right now is pretty amazing. So
Behind the Line is sponsored by Beating the Breaking Point. Beating the Breaking Point is a 7-part online training program designed specifically for first responders and frontline workers, and tailored to fill the gaps in your training to support resilience and sustainability. Whether you're new to the work and wanting to cultivate tools to prevent burnout, compassion fatigue, and related concerns, or you are deep into your years on the job and have gone a few rounds with burnout and other mental health challenges, this program offers the foundational pieces you need to support personal and professional wellness for the long haul. You are a helper. You love your work and you sacrifice a lot. Investing in you and your sustainability is the best gift you can give yourself and those who lean on you. We make this program as risk-free as possible by offering a limited money-back guarantee to ensure that it's a fit for you. If you enjoy Behind the Line, you are going to love this program. Google Beating the Breaking Point Lindsay and find everything you need to get started, or use the link in the show notes. Now, back to the episode. Yeah. I mean, it makes me think of, there's a book that I think every therapist has read. It's called The Gift of Therapy. And it's written by a very senior therapist, Irving Yalom, and he's speaking to training therapists, new therapists. And it's all of the bits of wisdom he can compile into one little book. And it's a fantastic book. But one of the things he says in it is it's all grist for the mill. And the idea is that everything is usable, right? So like in therapy, we talk about this idea that when people come in and they talk about like random stuff, because heavens knows it's not always the super deep, valuable, important things that you thought you were going to do when you did this job. A lot of times we're just talking about what happened on Tuesday. But that all of it is usable, and even how people come in and approach what happened on Tuesday and how they talk about what happened on Tuesday, like all of those bits and pieces have meaning and value and translate into what's hard in their lives and what they're struggling with. And to some extent, it's this broader piece of it's all grist for the mill. Like everything that happens to us is what we make of it, right? And so when we have really hard things happen, that doesn't mean we have to be like so grateful for the terrible things, but we can recognize that it's a piece of our story that still has value and meaning if we choose to hold it that way and carry it forward from that place. I think the place that we get really tripped up is where we perceive parts of our story from such a deep place of like victimhood, where we were the bearers of this thing that we feel it's impossible to carry forward with us in a way that we can feel like there's meaning in that story. That's where we get ourselves in trouble, because then it feels like I have no power, I have no control over making this part of my story feel like mine in a way I feel okay about. We don't have to feel okay about everything that's happened to us. We're not going to feel okay about lots of things that happen to us. But how do we still hold that that's part of my story and that it shapes who I am now in all of the hard ways, but also some of the really cool and meaningful ways about me?
Absolutely. I love the way that's beautifully said. I love that. And I think, you know, when I was in that moment, I remember being, getting out of St. Paul's Hospital and that my wife picking me up and driving me home. And there was this sense of what now? What do I do now? I can't go back to this career that I love so much. And who am I now? What do I do now? Do I just, do I lay down and just accept the fact that this is what it is, or what's next? What's the next chapter about? And that for me was that pivotal moment in my life where, I could sit down and just continue to be, like you mentioned, like the victim, or, let this is happening to me, or I could, choose to do something about it and take control of my life, like I did on that bridge deck. And, whether it was right or wrong, I took control of my life. And so that out of that has come something like really amazing. And I have a lot of pride in this, because I do believe that I'm here, and I'm not extremely religious, but I believe that, I'm on this planet to help other people. And I think and so since February 16th, 2021, I've started a nonprofit organization to help other first responders that are going through post-traumatic stress, to help the general public, because we know that in Canada, the rates of PTSD are not just related to first responders or people in the military. Sadly, it happens to our public. So high rates of PTSD amongst their public. So my mission now is to help others and to make sure that they don't go through what I went through. And so whether that be me going out and sharing a difficult story of my life, and which I've done, I think that is where that is where satisfaction and purpose, meaning, hope is in that. And I've gained a lot from that, a lot of that purpose, hope, and meaning.
Totally.
Through this.
There's a piece I want to hone in on for a second, because I think it's really valuable, and I don't know that we've touched on it on the show in a way that feels as clear. There's this piece about identity that we tend to build into our occupations, and we do that culturally in a lot of different ways, but first responders are especially terrible at this, where we like embody the uniform, and it feels so much a part of us that then we do have that question, who am I now without this thing? Which is so fascinating, right? Like, because the question really should be, what do I do now that I don't do this thing? But the question is weirdly, who am I now without this thing, right? And that really speaks to the degree to which we create this identity within the work that we do, that we really shouldn't. It's a terrible idea that we do that. And yet you then said this follow-up piece that I believe that my mission is to help people. And that's way different and much cooler, right? So I think one of the things I always find interesting is when I talk with people who are no longer going to be in the careers that they've done all these years, and frustratingly that they loved, right? Like, I don't want to leave. I loved doing what I'm doing, but I'm also aware that I cannot continue to do it and stay well. That when we are trying to separate that identity piece, one of the real sticky points is not knowing that my mission in life was not to be a paramedic or a corrections officer or a nurse or a whatever, right? That my mission speaks to why I loved that, but that I can find that in other places.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. I love that, you know, and believe it or not, I was one of those that said, don't ever define yourself as being, I am a paramedic. You are more than that. You know, we're not designed to be on this amazing planet just to work, right? And so I tell people, you know, people ask, you know, so what are some useful tips? And you know, when I talk to students, is make sure that you have outside hobbies. Make sure that you don't define yourself by your career. You're more than that. This is something that you maybe do for the 4 days on that you're a paramedic, but make sure on your 4 days off that you're doing something else, whether it be hobbies or interacting with your family or you know, whatever it may be. But you know, overtime is another thing, is people that just immerse themselves in that culture, and you know, on their days off, they're working overtime. The only friends that they have are other first responders. It's a dangerous path because it leads to that misrepresentation of yourself, of who you actually are, right? So, but yeah, I like the way you said that. You know, maybe it's not the job itself. It's what, you know. As a first responder, we help others. So there's other ways that I can continue to help people, you know, and gain the things that I love so much about that career, right? The conversation, being able to speak to people, being able to help others. So I found a lot of value and satisfaction and purpose and meaning in that, in what I'm doing now with this nonprofit.
That's awesome. I want to speak to one other piece, because you shared this piece about the 10 years in between, right? So kind of that initial discovery about PTSD and kind of this 10-year window where I thought I was doing all right. And then it kind of kicked me in the butt again. And there's a couple thoughts I have about that. I think one of the things that sounds like it kind of translates across that time is this kind of theme of a certain kind of call that feels especially hard, which I think a lot of people have, right? So whether it's the kid calls, or I know for some people it's the more geriatric calls, or it's those people that we feel differently vulnerable, and they often feel connected to our own personal stories, right? And so having awareness of our own stage of life, our story, what is going to be more vulnerable and sensitive for us, and then being differently conscientious about what we do after we've worked a call that reflects on or triggers aspects of that needs to be differently intentional. And if we can be differently intentional about it, I think we can be differently protective of having some of the things you experienced kind of like take us by surprise, right? I think the other piece, and I say this on the show a lot, but I feel like I will say it forever because there's never enough, is this piece about like pausing long enough to recognize how we're feeling, right? So in that 10-year span, my hunch is that not every single minute of it felt awesome. And that probably there was some amount of lead up from here to here that would have maybe served as an indicator that says, hey, heads up, Jeff, you're not as awesome as you think you are right this minute. And that had we caught that there, maybe it would have looked a little different, right? Like maybe the trajectory would not have landed me on a bridge deck. And who knows, like it's hard to speak to that all in hindsight, but I think it's I did the work and now I'm done and I'm great now and I'll be great forever. And I'm doing things, I'm exercising and I do woodwork.
Mm-hmm.
great, right? And like
Yep.
we lose track of the fact that like those things are awesome, right? We talk a lot on the show about self-care. We talk a lot in therapy about self-care. Those are super valuable things that help us counterbalance the weight of the work, and it's good. But if we're not taking semi-regular pauses to check in with ourselves and go like, okay, but how have I been sleeping lately? How often have the nightmares been cropping up? Are they getting more frequent? How often do I dread going into work? How
Yeah.
many days
Yeah.
this last week did I feel like I'm excited to go do my job versus, ugh, I don't want to be there, right?
Yeah.
Like those kinds of checkpoints that let us kind of assess and reassess. And it's actually why, and the reason I talk about it a lot. So we built a tool that does that. So we built a tool called the Indicators Checklist and Triage Guide. And its
Amazing.
job is cool on the front end. And I think that's where a lot of people use it is they want to do an initial, I feel like I might be burning out. They do the checklist and they find out kind of where they rank on it. But the tool is not meant for a one use and done moment. Like use it repeatedly, use it over time, every month, every quarter, interact with it again so that you have a sense of, oh, last month I ranked here, this month I'm ranking here. What does that tell me about where I'm headed? Oh, and next month, look, I'm ranking it again, even higher. Probably that speaks to some changes I need to make or some things I need to do differently in order to try to catch this before I get so far down the road.
Absolutely. And I think that's amazing. The concept of having a proactive approach to our mental health and resiliency is amazing because
Totally.
I still think there's not enough of that. You know, I was having lunch with an old coworker, a friend of mine that had been off for 3 months, and he was talking about what am I going to tell people why I'm going. What am I going to tell people why I'm off? So there's still those cultural norms and stigmas that exist.
Totally.
With putting your hand up and saying, you know what, maybe not, I'm not okay. But if there was something that a standard approach to this, that it was like, and you have to look at first responders are a little bit different. And I think they like the idea of gadgets and equipment and that sort of thing. But if you had something there for them that was, you can see what people's baseline is on a regular basis to see where they score or whatever it may be. I think that's amazing. And it gives you insight into your own suffering. And it's not, and I think it helps break that stigma that's associated with saying, hey, you know, I'm not doing great after this call. You know, maybe you are, but I'm not. So, and I think more needs to be done because, you know, we're 2022 and we're still seeing some of these same stigmas that existed 20, 30 years ago. Right. So, and, you know, I lost 5 friends to suicide, coworkers to suicide in my career, in my 20 career, and that's not acceptable. And that's still happening today, you know? So, I think more needs to be done for this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you 100%. I think it's why we're here. I think it's why your nonprofit exists the way that it exists, right? Like it's that recognition that there are too many great people that are going down. Yeah. And it's needless, right? Like there's just, it surprises and continues to surprise me how often I hear things like, you know, we talk about how we're supposed to watch out for PTSD. Everyone says that there's posters all over our workplace that say it. But if you ask me to list the symptoms of PTSD, I actually have no idea what the fuck I'm supposed to be looking for. Like,
you're absolutely,
how is that a thing?
You're absolutely right.
How is that a thing?
Yeah. You know, I was talking to someone about this, to a teacher actually about this, is that we are with our kids. If we teach them, you know, how to read and write and math and socials and science and all that kind of stuff. But what we don't teach them is how their bodies react to stress. And why isn't that part of curriculum? I think you have younger kids. I think they maybe are doing a better job with emotional intelligence now. Like I think they use color codes or something like that.
Yes, there's a traffic light system.
But there you go. But we, you know, I can speak to my generation as that wasn't something that was part of. I found out, unfortunately, going through what I went through, how my body reacts to stress and the amount of work that I've done on my own to figure out how my body reacts to stress. But if we found out early on, if that was part of curriculum, is this is how your body reacts to stress, and this is what you need to do to take care of yourself and self-care and all that kind of stuff. Why aren't we doing that? Why isn't that not part of whether it's, and I can still tell you today, part of the primary care paramedic program, there's only 4 hours allotted to mental health and self-care. 4 hours is not acceptable for people that are going to go out in a career that could potentially put them into the same situation that I went through. So that needs to change. And I still, I want to be a part of that change. If anything that I can do to support that, I think the work that you're doing is amazing. But as we know, change is slow and things take time, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's hard, right? Because I think there's also this piece about like political will. And unfortunately, so many of these professions are entrenched in political systems that don't value them the way that they should. And so I think that's one of the other challenges is, and I often talk about this idea of like, we need to be really on top of this for ourselves because our workplaces often won't do it for us. There are some that are the exception to the rule and they're awesome. I've heard about some really, really cool workplaces that really are trying to be ahead of the game and on top of things and really supportive of their people. But that's a newer and emerging thing. It is for sure not the standard. And the challenge is that it's cheaper to just get new people than it is to invest in the existing ones we have. The really unfortunate thing, and the thing that scares me honestly, is I think about, if my kids needed a paramedic, if my kids needed to go to the hospital, what I know is that the majority of the people working right now are new. And that terrifies me, right? Like, I don't want the rookie who's seeing my kid when they fall off their bike. I want the person that has experience. I want the person who has been in it a long time and has seen a little bit of everything. And I want them to be good so that my kid is good and I can trust that this is okay. Right. And yet I'm hearing so many stories of especially emerge and ICU nurses right now that are talking about, like, I've only been on the job maybe 2 years and I'm senior staff. That is not okay.
Yeah, the ambulance service, it used to, when I got hired, it would, I worked for, and those, when I got hired, I worked for 5 years. I had to work 5 years part-time. So, and I went to all over BC. I traveled all over British Columbia with my family, and it took seniority to get back into Vancouver. Currently, I believe that they're hiring full-time Vancouver just off, like from finishing their courses. So people without any experience. And the opioid crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic has really highlighted burnout rates. You talk about like a shelf life on a first responder career. I believe there's an expiry date. They talk about a 15-year mark of and I think that might even be too long with the amount of exposure that's out there. So you're right. We're losing good people. We're losing experienced people because burnout rates are so high. And I think had we done a little bit of work to address that early on, whether it been awareness or we'd save a lot of lives, save a lot of marriages, save all sorts of different, preventative work.
I mean, it's hard, right? Because I think there is this part of me that also recognizes that, I did a therapy degree, like I did a master's in counseling psychology, and we talked a lot about self-care and mitigating the risks of vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue and all of those things. And it's good. And I'm thankful that it was there and that I can look back to it to kind of remind myself. But also at the time, I was in my early 20s and thought I was invincible and thought, like that's for the sissy therapists that just don't, right? Like just aren't tough enough to hack it. And for sure, within the first 4 years of my career, had burnout, right? Like,
absolutely.
Right. And so it's just that, like, we can front load so much, but we do need to front load, and we need to front load with what we're looking for, what we should even be noticing. And for me, that was one of the pieces too, is I was very well aware of what I'm supposed to do for burnout, but I did not have great, clear understanding of what I should be looking for in my own self as it related to burnout. So I knew how to talk about it with other people. I knew how to assess it for them, but to actually like pause long enough to assess myself and to check in with how I'm doing. And the thing about burnout is it sneaks up on us. Like it's this incremental layered thing that doesn't just like show up on Tuesday and now I have burnt, like it is gradual. And so I think it's not just the training piece, although that would be amazing to have included more in training, but I also think it needs to be this like rolled out over time. Part of our continuing education credits need to be ongoing education about what
Mhm.
we know about post-traumatic stress and burnout and compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, organizational trauma, right? Like
Yeah,
these are
yeah, huge things.
pieces that
Yeah,
are important to talk
yeah,
about.
yeah, absolutely. No, and I look forward to a future that exists, you know, and I think we're
Mm-hmm.
heading in the right direction. I think all
Yeah.
those things that you mentioned are great, and I think we're headed towards that direction. The trouble is we're seeing is that change is slow, and these things
Yeah.
take time, and there's a lot of red tape. There's a lot
Totally.
of you know, political bureaucracy, funding issues, all sorts of
Yeah.
problems that shouldn't be barriers for this, but they are and they exist. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
Okay, my last question for
Yes.
you, Jeff, is if you could speak to students or rookies in your profession, what words of wisdom or advice would you share with them, or hope would you share for them to receive support in their career going forward? Like, you've done a lot of training, so what are the things that you say to students that feel like the really meaningful stuff they might not get from someone else?
Yeah, like I think we hit on a few of them. I think self-care is really important. And, you know, I mentioned there's still that stigma and some of the cultural norms that exist with putting your
Yeah,
hand up and saying, you know what, that bothered me, that there's something wrong with
totally.
that. That's okay. That absolutely can save your life one day. That you know, being able to recognize that something impacted you, and you know, that you're having a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. We hear that before, you know. Uh,
Yeah,
I often tell the new students, if they walked in and started crying, that's okay. That's absolutely okay
yeah,
to have a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. So that's important. Don't ever lose touch with your emotions and humanity. Don't ever put that aside, because
yeah,
that can get you into trouble. So
yeah,
and don't identify yourself. We talked about that earlier. Is don't identify yourself by your career. You're more than this. You're more than a paramedic.
mm-hmm.
You're, whether you're a father or a friend, or you have outside hobbies and interests. That's so important.
Yeah,
And yeah, and enjoy those moments, and like that I talked about, those moments, those conversations that were really meaningful in my career, where I got to meet people and have some, enjoy those moments, because those are the ones that you'll think about when that career is over and you're retired.
yeah,
So
yeah.
enjoy those moments. Yeah.
Solid summary. I like
Yeah.
it.
Oh,
All
good.
right. Before we wrap up, I also want to give you a chance to chat just a little bit about your nonprofit and to share a little bit about the detachment technique.
You bet. So I appreciate that. So when I got out of the hospital, I was introduced to a registered counselor named Steve King. Now, people be apprehensive about Stephen King being your counselor, right?
Right.
That I would be, and right away I was like, oh my, no,
Right.
you got to be kidding me.
I'm sure he gets
But
that a lot.
totally. But he's had over 30 years of experience working in the field of trauma and addictions, and we know that addictions, there's a lot of trauma related to that. So he's developed a treatment modality that's based on energy psychology, acupressure, and some accelerated information processing. So it's a skill set to help sort of navigate the impacts of shock and trauma, which I think is important. We touch base on having sort of a proactive approach, something in your back pocket that you can use on your own to get through some difficult calls. So what we're trying to do is to build awareness and education around post-traumatic stress, get help to those that have fallen through the cracks in the system, whether it's a financial barrier or just not getting the help that they need. So
Right.
we're trying to address that. And so we offer support through our website, www.detachmenttechnique.com. There's a toll-free number on there that you can reach out, and I'm happy to give anyone information about that. And Steve is working with lots of first responders in the Lower Mainland. We've had some good success with. There's also some other things on our website, some other wellness resources. We offer trauma-informed yoga, which has been great. I've been
Awesome.
I love doing yoga. It's
Yeah.
part of my daily routine right now. And just there's some blogs and some just some information on there that I think is super useful to anyone who's going through a difficult time right now. So if there's anything that I can do, please reach out to our website. I'm happy to talk to you, even if it's just a conversation.
Awesome.
I've had, you know, since I've shared this story, I've had so many people reach out to me, and I'm
Yeah.
humbled by their stories. I really am. I thought I was going through a difficult time until I hear what others are going through. So,
Yeah.
and that it means a lot that people have been vulnerable with me and been able to share their stories. So,
Totally.
Yeah. So
Cool.
great stuff.
Well,
Thank you so much.
We will for sure put your website on or in the show notes. So for those that are wanting to connect, they'll be super easy to find there, usually just below wherever they're listening or watching this. And I just want to say thanks, Jeff, for taking the time for one, but also for being willing to come in and share so vulnerably about your story. I know it's not always easy to jump on and be public about the more personal and hard parts of our stories. And I really appreciate that you are allowing yourself to A, just share it, but B, share it in the hopes that it helps other people kind of avoid what you've had to go through. And so I really appreciate that that's something that you're willing to put yourself out there for.
Oh, thanks, Lindsay. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I love what you're doing. I think this is amazing what you're doing, and I know you're going to help lots of people out there. So thank you for what you do.
Thanks so much for that. And likewise, I think it's fantastic the work that you're doing as well. So we're going to change the world, Jeff. We just need more time and a lot more money, probably.
Well,
some
money,
politicians in our pockets.
I know. Wink, wink.
That.
I know. I'll try. I'll do my best.
Yeah. All right.
I want to say one more big thank you to my guest for today. It is so wonderful to get to have this opportunity to talk to some incredible and amazing people who have been out there doing the work, seeing the stuff, and figuring out how to hold it differently. I'm so grateful for the willingness of these incredible people to jump on with me, share their stories, and share with you the various ways that they're learning and finding to move through this kind of work with some amount of sanity intact. I think we can all take something really special from that. As we wrap up today, I want to encourage you to please reach out and connect if you have any questions or feedback. You know I love hearing from you and shaping this podcast to echo your needs and interests. I also love hearing about what you're working on and how you're using what we talk about on the show. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Lindsay A. Foss, or you can email me at support@thrive-life.ca. If you have any feedback for my amazing guest today, please let me know and I'm happy to pass it along. I continue to be so amazed and inspired by this community that we are building and creating together. I'm so grateful for your support and that many of you are so incredibly keen to share about Behind the Line to others on the front lines. Thank you so much for sharing with those you know. I want to let you know that we do have ways to support sharing. So if you reach out to me, I can send you posters and cards and all kinds of other ways that you can share with your workplace and your colleagues about Behind the Line and our other resources. Also know that you can share any of our social media posts or forward any of our emails that we send you with reminders about the show. We just want more people to be supported. Know that we can be found online on our website, on most major podcast platforms, as well as on YouTube. Many of our summer series episodes will be videotaped, and we will include those recordings on YouTube. So check those out if you want to join us in real life. Click subscribe to get alerts about our latest episodes, or subscribe to our email list to hear from me about all the exciting things we have going on and coming up. You'll find all the details you need in the show notes, and you can access our email list by clicking to get our free Beating the Breaking Point Indicators Checklist and Triage Guide, which helps you facilitate self-assessing burnout and related concerns. We make all of our different resources available to you guys because the work you do really, really matters to our communities. But way more than that, you matter. Your life matters, and the people who matter to you matter. And we want to make sure that you have what you need to keep up the good work at work, but as well in your very real and amazing life outside of the work. So use it and share it. And until next time, stay safe.